One particular evening, Dennis Lowry strolled down Fifth Avenue in New York City. He was nicely dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, and the gleam of his polished leather shoes reflected the streetlights. He blended effortlessly with the wealthy professionals that filled the busy street. But Dennis wasn't just another businessman hurrying to his next meeting. He was one of the city's most respected restaurant critics, known for his sharp insights and brutally honest reviews. Dennis's reputation had been built on one simple principle: anonymity. He never revealed his identity when dining, preferring to experience the service as any regular customer would. This approach allowed him to accurately assess not just the quality of the food, but also the treatment of patrons who weren't recognized as celebrities or VIPs. That night, he had a reservation at one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, a place where the rich, famous, and influential came to dine. The restaurant, known as Hodenick's, was renowned for its luxurious ambience and gourmet menu. It was a hotspot for celebrities, CEOs, and social media influencers. But that very night, Dennis wasn't there to admire the lavish setting. His goal was simple: to evaluate the food, service, and overall experience. And, as always, he would do so without anyone knowing who he was. As Dennis approached the grand entrance of the restaurant, a tall blonde woman with a sharp smile greeted him. Her name tag read Brandy. She was the head waitress, a woman known for her strict demeanor and her tendency to judge patrons based on appearance. Her eyes flicked over Dennis's attire, a tailored suit that could easily cost more than her monthly rent, and then up to his face, a subtle change in her expression hinting at her inner calculations. There was a slight pause, just enough for Dennis to notice the tightening of her lips, as though she wasn't entirely convinced he belonged there. "How can I help you?" she asked, her voice cool and dripping with condescension, as if she believed Dennis had wandered into the wrong place by mistake. "Yes, I have a reservation," Dennis replied, keeping his tone polite and steady. Brandy's eyes narrowed slightly as she glanced down at the reservation list on her podium. "Are you sure?" she asked, lifting an eyebrow. "This is a high-end restaurant," she emphasized, the words high-end deliberately spoken as if they were a foreign concept to him. Dennis remained composed, nodding calmly. "Yes, I'm sure. The reservation is under Lowry," he said, refusing to rise to the bait. Brandy scanned the list, her fingers skimming over the names. When her eyes landed on Lowry, she pursed her lips in thinly veiled disappointment. She let out a small sigh before speaking. "Fine," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You can sit over there." She pointed toward a small, cramped table near the kitchen, far from the spacious and luxurious seats by the large windows that offered breathtaking views of the New York City skyline. Dennis followed her gesture with his eyes. He could tell immediately that this wasn't an innocent mistake. The prime seating areas were reserved for VIPs, for guests Brandy deemed worthy of her time and attention. But tonight, she had no idea who Dennis Lowry really was, nor did she know the impact this small decision would have. With a faint, knowing smile, Dennis nodded and said, "Thank you." He took his seat without complaint. The restaurant was, by all appearances, a marvel of modern luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft, golden glow over the room. Elegant oil paintings adorned the walls, each one more beautiful than the last. Every table was perfectly set with sparkling glassware, silver cutlery, and fresh flowers. The air was filled with the soft sound of jazz music, creating an atmosphere of sophistication and refinement. Waiters in crisp white shirts and black ties moved swiftly between tables, attending to the elite guests with flawless precision. From his small table near the kitchen, however, Dennis couldn't fully appreciate the ambience. The clatter of pots and pans from the kitchen staff, the hurried footsteps of waiters rushing by, and the occasional bursts of orders being called out in the back made it difficult to focus on the elegance around him. It was clear that the restaurant was designed to dazzle, but Dennis had been to many high-end places like this before. He knew what to expect: impeccable service, exquisite flavors, and an overall unforgettable dining experience. But tonight, something felt off. Minutes ticked by, and Dennis noticed that despite the restaurant's polished exterior, there was an underlying tension in the air. As he perused the menu, which boasted gourmet dishes like seared scallops, duck confit, and truffle risotto, Brandy returned to his table. She placed the menu in front of him with a swift, careless motion, barely making eye contact. "There you go," she said curtly before turning her attention to the other diners without waiting for a response. Dennis began to notice the differences in Brandy's behavior as he watched her move from table to table. At the center of the room, seated near the windows, was a young couple dressed in designer clothing. Brandy approached them with a bright smile, laughing at their jokes and engaging them in friendly conversation. She made sure they were comfortable, offering suggestions from the menu and going above and beyond to make their dining experience special. But when it came to Dennis, her demeanor was cold and detached. He raised his hand to get her attention, but she was too busy entertaining the wealthier, predominantly white guests who filled the room. Every now and then, she would glance in his direction, but she made no effort to serve him with the same enthusiasm she showed the other patrons. After what felt like an eternity, Brandy finally returned to his table, her expression sour. "What'll it be?" she asked, tapping her pen impatiently against her notepad, as though she couldn't wait to be done with him. Dennis ordered the filet mignon, medium rare, with a side of truffle mashed potatoes. He spoke evenly, his tone betraying none of the irritation he felt. Brandy scribbled down his order without comment and hurried away. As Dennis sat back and surveyed the room, the subtle yet unmistakable message behind Brandy's behavior became clear. He was not like the rest of the clientele, and she had made sure to remind him of that. But Dennis wasn't angry. He knew better than to let it affect him. He had learned long ago that patience was key, and tonight was no exception. The evening wore on, and the restaurant filled with the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of satisfied diners enjoying their meals. Waiters delivered plates of gourmet dishes in quick succession, each one meticulously prepared and presented like a work of art. Dennis watched as plates of seared duck, tender lamb chops, and creamy risotto were delivered to tables all around him, while his own meal was nowhere to be seen. 30 minutes passed, then 40. Still, there was no sign of his food. Dennis sat quietly, observing the other guests and noting the disparity in service. Brandy continued to glide across the room with practiced ease, her smile bright as she poured wine and engaged in light conversation with the wealthier patrons. She moved effortlessly between the tables of businessmen and socialites, ensuring their glasses were always full and their plates perfect. But when it came to Dennis, she remained invisible. Finally, after nearly an hour, Brandy appeared with his meal. She placed the plate in front of him with a loud thud, making no effort to hide her disdain. There was no apology for the long wait, no inquiry into whether he needed anything else. The filet mignon in front of him was a far cry from the five-star experience he had been expecting. It was overcooked, dry, and lacked the tenderness a properly cooked steak should have. The truffle mashed potatoes were cold and lumpy, looking as though they had been sitting out for far too long. Dennis took a deep breath and cut into the steak. As he chewed, his suspicions were confirmed. This wasn't just a bad meal, it was a reflection of the restaurant's lack of care. He had reviewed countless restaurants over the years, but this experience stood out as one of the worst. It wasn't just the food, it was the entire service, from the moment he stepped through the door to the moment his poorly cooked meal arrived. Despite his disappointment, Dennis remained calm. He had seen this kind of behavior before, and he knew exactly how it would end. Brandy had no idea who she was dealing with, and Dennis wasn't about to reveal his identity just yet. When dessert time came, Brandy didn't even bother offering him the menu. Instead, she dropped the check on his table without a word, making it clear she couldn't care less if he stayed or left. Dennis smiled faintly to himself. He had seen it all before: the assumption that he didn't belong, the dismissal of his presence, the rushed service, all based on nothing more than surface-level judgments. Dennis paid the bill without complaint, leaving a generous tip despite the poor service. As he rose to leave, he took one last look around the room. On the surface, the restaurant was a place of luxury and elegance. But beneath the chandeliers, there was something deeply wrong. Dennis knew that by the next morning, things would be very different. The following day, Hodenik's restaurant was preparing for another day of business, expecting to welcome more high-profile guests through its doors. Brandy arrived at work with her usual confidence, ready to charm and impress the day's elite clientele. But as she walked through the doors of the restaurant, there was an unusual buzz in the air. Her co-workers were whispering among themselves, and the restaurant's manager, a tall, stern-looking man named Mr. Kelvin, was standing by the entrance with a newspaper in his hands with a grim expression. Brandy approached him, curious. "What's going on?" she asked. Mr. Kelvin glanced up at her. His eyes narrowed. Without a word, he handed her the newspaper. As Brandy unfolded the paper, her eyes widened in shock. There, on the front page of the city's most respected dining column, was a headline that made her heart sink: Hodenik's falls short. A review of disappointment. The article, written by none other than Dennis Lowry, detailed his experience at the restaurant the night before. It described the poor service, the overcooked food, and the blatant disregard for guests who didn't fit the restaurant's ideal clientele. He didn't mention Brandy by name, but his descriptions were damning enough. "Brandy," Mr. Kelvin said, his voice low and angry. "We've had complaints before, but this is going to destroy us." Brandy's face flushed with embarrassment and fear. She had no idea that the man she had dismissed so easily was one of the most powerful food critics in the city. And now, her actions had brought the entire restaurant to its knees. Dennis Lowry had left the restaurant without making a scene, but his words in print were far more powerful than any confrontation. By the end of the day, the restaurant's phones were ringing off the hook with cancellations, and social media was abuzz with outrage over the treatment described in the review. Hodenik's reputation, once sparkling, had been tarnished overnight. As for Dennis, he continued his work as a critic, knowing that his review would serve as a reminder to those in the service industry: never judge a book by its cover. And always treat every customer with respect, because you never know who they might be. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends too. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more fascinating stories. Have a nice day.